This video completely spoils Westworld Season 1, and is also coincidentally sponsored by Vikings.
Alright. We got NitPix.
Remember when Westworld was on your TV? Remember how you watched and smiled with glee? The show tackled themes of human consciousness, whilst also having robots with staggering voluptuousness. The show perpetually, intellectually stimulated you whilst you sat with your bros and watched with your crew. Sure, it was hard to follow in places and it made your head ache. But you finally found something special that smelt of candy and cake. Any complaints? Ha! They're just for the slow-minded and thick. But underneath it all was the putrid stench of dick. As it dragged on, no reap for reward. The visuals are stunning. Why am I bored? There can't be little problems niggling inside. I've invested 10 hours into this shit! You cried. Upon hearing this, I crawl out my hole. Criticizing art is how I make art. Have you played Vikings? It's a good game. It's an actual fact that 100% of all people who like cowboys also really love Vikings. And I have this sweet-ass game for everyone who vibes with them RPG games of the 90s and noughties. Vikings. I mean, how can 20 million players be wrong? But it's not just about the clan battles with Vikings, you also have the sweet nation vs nation combat, which truly makes this game lit. You can play the game however you like. You want to be a peaceful leader? Go ahead, my guy. Or what? You actually fancy annihilating everyone ever? That's cool as well, you absolute don. And by downloading the game, you also help me out. NitPix. Download the game now through my links below to get 200 gold, an initial protection shield, and your place in Valhalla. Jeez! On paper, Westworld is a fantastic concept, and it translates really effectively to the television medium. I mean, how can you go wrong with an ultra-realistic cowboy theme park where people can do whatever they want with no consequences? The robots at the park are known as hosts, and they function to the highest standards of artificial intelligence, looking, sounding, and probably smelling like real people. The hosts all believe they're human, and the world around them is genuine. So it's like a mix of Jurassic Park with its otherworldly set pieces, and The Truman Show with its philosophical themes on the nature of reality. I mean, who would have thought that this goofy science fiction movie from 1973 would be reimagined and adapted to become such a beautiful epic in modern television? Not old NitPix, and I'm actually a bit psychic, so that's really saying something. Also, on a related note, I got a psychic vision the other day. Elizabeth Brown, I know you're watching this. You're going to die tomorrow. Please make sure to say goodbye to the people you love. I'm so sorry. Anyway, they legitimately took this and turned it into this. I love the idea of taking a dated film with a great concept and giving it a polish for a modern audience. Oftentimes reboots or remakes feel like cash grabs, trying to take advantage of a known franchise or brand. In this case, the two Westworlds couldn't be further apart, and this adaptation really takes the best thing about it, the concept, and builds on it. Now, there are 3 great things about Westworld: Anthony Hopkins, the music, and everything which is actually Westworld. To anyone that's confused about the last one, I'll get back to that. Every single scene with Anthony Hopkins is an absolute blast. Hopkins nails every overdrawn, pretentious monologue he's given, and you can't help but love it. He's able to communicate menace, vulnerability, whimsy, and cynicism with just a few words and a look. Almost all of the scenes with Ford are structured exactly the same. Someone threatens him, his position, his vision, or even his life, and then he pauses, smiles, and explains to them exactly how he is the one in control, and how you shouldn't fuck with him. If any other actor was given this role, these scenes wouldn't be nearly as convincing, and would likely feel as melodramatic as the scenes inside the park with the scripted bots. Though these scenes are repetitive and predictable, seeing what Ford has up his sleeve never gets boring. The music in Westworld is perfectly on point for what it needs to be. Ramin Djawadi, who also does the soundtrack for Game of Thrones, has actually outdone himself here. The foundation of the music for Westworld is based on covers of modern songs within the musical restriction of the historical era, oftentimes played on an automatic piano in the park. These covers are hauntingly beautiful and are composed with a high degree of skill and professionalism. The use of these covers within the show allows the viewer to remain conscious of the larger world that exists outside the park, reminding us that it's all an artificial world. It gives the players who are visiting the park dominance over the hosts, as they know something that the hosts don't. However, it's taken further, as every time a cover of a known song is used, it's always specifically chosen to be able to tie directly, tonally and thematically into what is happening in each scene. So just to put this in perspective, you can watch a 30-second scene with an interesting, compelling cover of a known song, and just with the music alone you understand the context of the universe in which the action is taking place, and the primary theme that's tied into the central character within that scene. The original score is equally as good on its own merit, and oftentimes they really serve to add dramatic tension, as well as create a truly unique ambience. Most of the best scenes in Westworld are only as good as they are because the music is so expertly composed. Remember when I said I'd talk about the scenes which are actually Westworld later? Well, welcome to later. Let's get stuck in, gang! Woo! What I mean by scenes that are actually Westworld is anything that is taking part in the park narrative, which is specifically made to be part of Westworld. Okay, let me give you some examples, just so we're clear. The scene where Hector steals the safe from the saloon, that's Westworld. Park security fishing a bearded robot out of a canyon, that's not Westworld. The man in black interrupting an execution just in time, now that's Westworld. Maeve vaguely threatening Westworld employees. Well, that's definitely not Westworld. In fact, anything that happens outside of the actual park pretty much isn't Westworld. The scenes that do this, the scenes that are Westworld, are truly what make Westworld unique as a show. The harsh, varied western landscapes, the colourful, quirky RPG characters giving out quests, and the exciting action set pieces. These elements really make you want to be a part of this world and makes you imagine how you yourself would interact with this place. Despite the fact that this show does have its problems, there are tons to appreciate here. I'm not saying this show isn't worth watching, I just really want Jonathan Nolan to chill the fuck out a bit. Now, I'm glad I kicked this off by highlighting what I liked, because I don't hate this show. I'm not this dark, cynical man who just sits on his high horse shitting on everything, you know? I'm just a human with normal human emotions and feelings, just like you. However, having said that, this show is such a fucking shitty, boring, convoluted clusterfuck. And look, I know I describe a lot of things as boring. I mean, I'm not kidding myself, that's pretty much half of my video repertoire. However, let's really look at what I mean when I say that very often, Westworld is boring as fuck. Westworld has an entire cacophony of stories happening all at once. You have Dolores, you have Will, you have the Man in Black, you have Maeve, you have Dr. Ford, you have Bernard, and many, many more. They all have different mysteries and hidden agendas, twists and revelations, and to be able to keep up with all of it, you may have to take notes, as trying to keep track of who's doing what, why they're doing it, and what the emotional stakes are is beyond impossible. But I want to ask you a question about these characters. Which one are you supposed to connect with and root for? In Game of Thrones, you've got a whole load of them, take your pick. Same with Breaking Bad, The Wire, or any good ensemble television series, really. But I am honestly at a loss here with Westworld, because it's not Ford. We don't know his motivation, his plan, or what he's even doing until the last episode. Dolores is a tag-along with Will for most of the season, rarely making independent decisions. It's not Will, he was just playing the game. His scenes were fun, but it's not like he was ever in any danger or breaking any of the park rules. Everyone in this show seems to float around, refusing to be tied into specific goals or to make decisions that have real consequences. What you want to see narratively from an ensemble TV series like Westworld is a series of character arcs. The foundation of good storytelling is showing change, starting one place and ending in another. Westworld is full of changes. Maeve and Dolores start as two unassuming Westworld hosts and end the season completely different. Well, once Maeve has her intelligence increased by the livestock employees, that's pretty much her arc completed. There's no more revelations for her to realise, though she does decide not to leave the park and instead see her daughter. But there was no particular moment or feeling that justified that decision. If she had just stayed on the train, it wouldn't have felt like a story was incomplete. The Ford just before he dies is the same Ford in episode 1. Same goes for Teresa. Same goes for the writer. Same goes for Logan. Bernard realises he's not human, but apart from that, he's pretty much the same. Not to devalue the realisation of not being human, but the show itself devalues it because Bernard realises it twice. Ford says he's been told many times over the years, but then he just gets reset. This is why Westworld is boring. The host can be reset back to square one at any moment, which we're made fully aware of. William also has a character arc, but it's not a very good one, sadly. He starts off as a naive, humble, kind-hearted business boy, and ends as a brutal, murdering psychopath. Is this transition done slowly, showing the cracks early on and making his involvement in the game progressively more sinister? No, it's done as a twist. Surprise! William is a villain now. Why? Something about the corruption of humanity and the evil in all men. It's the realization that two people you thought were separate people are actually one of the same. So that means we're watching a non-linear story, a Nolan signature, which honestly feels like it's simply integrated to make the story more convoluted and offer you more twists that don't actually hold much substance. For a lot of it, you end up either waiting for the characters to understand something you already know, or the twists hold no real narrative substance. The older William, or the man in black, spends the whole season looking for a maze, but once he finds it, it's made clear that it's not for him, and he's just told to go to a party where he gets shot and then he smiles a bit. That's his entire story, a literal wild goose chase. Bernard is another character that adds nothing to the narrative of the show. The twist that he's a robot doesn't lead to anything. It's not like we have a shortage of robots having existential crises here. Actually, can we please talk about how tedious robots having existential crises becomes? It is happening constantly, and the only character with whom it matters with is Dolores, but sadly she's one of the dullest characters, acting really ditzy throughout. The hosts are written specifically to be over-the-top caricatures and behave in a generic way. This is a specific choice by the writers, and it is a fun idea, but it means that it's really hard to connect with the hosts as characters because they talk like they're in a shitty Western movie. This is particularly highlighted when the hosts talk to each other. Will is always talking about how Dolores is not like the others, how she seems human, but I don't know how he came to that conclusion when she's acting like this.
Of course I'm real.
I can't tell anymore.
When the hosts are constantly acting in an inhuman way, it's hard to be emotionally invested. Even when they start having weird psychotic breaks and talking to themselves, which is as deep as Dolores gets really. Who can honestly tell me that they were on the edge of their seat with curiosity as Dolores played tarot cards with herself and then started crying? Dolores as a character is bland, yes, but at least she's important to the plot, eventually leading to the host revolution and triggering that juicy cliffhanger. But what the fuck is the point with Maeve? Because she also has an existential crisis where she figures out her world is false. I think. And we have no idea what triggers that. So for most of the show, you just sort of think it's just randomly happening to hosts. And yes, I know by the end we understand that Ford programmed her to do it. I think. But then, that just means that Maeve's entire story leads to her staging a huge escape plan at the same time as the party, so all the security would be distracted while someone got all these hosts out of the basement. So everything she did in the first season was leading to a distraction. But the very idea of that being Ford's plan seems really far-fetched and dumb. His entire plan of her escape completely depended on the cooperation of these two Westworld butchers, and we are given absolutely no reason as to why they would help her. This is the closest we get.
You really do make a terrible human being.
What normal human being is totally comfortable with breaking all their workplace regulations and watching what I would assume is their colleagues get brutally murdered right in front of them? I don't know if we were supposed to be rooting for Maeve, like a majority of the characters, but I found her to be acting quite villainous and manipulative to the poor, mentally deficient Westworld employees. A large amount of Westworld's runtime is set outside of Westworld, in the corporate office, which is what we all want to see. For example, there's this really exciting plotline where Elsie and Ashley, the security guard, look for a woodcutter who ran away from the park. They find him and then he kills himself. Elsie figures out that someone was using him to transmit information. I wonder who smuggled the data. No, fuck the cowboy shit. I want to know who's been smuggling data. Who was it? Who smuggled the data? I'm dying to know. But yeah, a series about cyborg cowboy robots is half made up of office politics. The idea of people running a park on the creative scope of Westworld could be an intriguing space for understanding how the park works. Scenes where they're running Westworld like a dungeon master would run a game of Dungeons and Dragons could be really exciting, but unfortunately, everyone who works at Westworld is completely incompetent. There are story writers getting drunk and pissing on people's working space, livestock employees trying to fuck hosts in secret hoping not to get caught, and security not noticing Maeve's painfully obvious escape plan before it's too late. It can be argued that seeing the inner workings of the park leads to scenes inside the park making less sense to the viewer. Why is it that when the man in black wants to use an explosive, he needs permission to light it from the programmers, but Maeve and Hector can just kill themselves in a fire without anyone noticing? Now, you could say Ford programmed it, or planned for it, or whatever, and yeah, you could say that, that's fine, but you're a pleb! Because the pyrotechnic stuff is clearly controlled by the programmers. They sit around the map watching the park. They would have noticed that shit straight away. The park is also really inconsistent with whether they should lobotomize or try to fix the hosts, which becomes really frustrating as there are hosts which are giving off clear red flags and they still send the fuckers out. It's just bad business practice. Add that with the fact that all the characters, except for Daddy, just act in a really overly dramatic way, which at points feels like it's on par with how the hosts in the park act. This show is literally as pretentious as Hannibal. The characters are constantly staring at each other, or looking off into the distance all sad. They talk in a vague way, often implementing an anecdote or a metaphor, questioning the nature of humanity in the form of an overly drawn out monologue. These scenes feel like they're written by an edgy drama student for their grad piece. Ultimately, when you bring it down to its core, Westworld only has two characters that are actually relevant to the cliffhanger, which are Dolores and Ford. Every other character doesn't have any particular effect on the rest of the series, nor do they seem to even have a full arc. All they seem to do is serve the various themes of the series. The themes being the nature of human consciousness, the fact that human beings are objectively evil, and the idea of constructed reality. These themes are interesting, however, the show uses its characters for the simple fact of emphasizing these very apparent ideas. They don't try to build these thematic explorations around characters who have stories that are in any way relevant to the universe, or result in any sort of consequences to the people around them. The consequences of Dolores' story is that it triggers a revolution. The consequences of Ford's involvement in the story is towards this revolution. But anyone else, William, Bernard, or Maeve, have no consequences to the world around them, or the long-term well-being of other characters that we care about, which makes their involvement meaningless. Watching any of their narratives feels like a waste of time, as we are not rewarded for it, and if you want to say it was worth it for reinstating the painfully obvious themes, then you can say that. But for me, it feels like it just gives us the illusion of depth and story progression, when in reality, it's all very generic and bland. Now, despite the many problems that this series is plagued with, I would be lying if I said I wasn't excited for Season 2. Season 1 ended on such a great note that it almost made me forget how fucky the rest of the series was. There's enough great ideas at play that at the very least I'm interested. And now that the park has deteriorated into the mental civil war of hosts against machines, I'm really hopeful that they might be able to approach this season with a much stronger sense of plot development, giving us something new and moving the story forward with each episode, as well as making the characters likeable and giving them an arc. I really like what they seem to be doing with Dolores by just making her a crazy human-hating psychopath. That will certainly be a nice change from the weird ditzy Dolores who's always crying and talking to imaginary friends. And now that the conflict is at the forefront, it seems like it's going to be much clearer what the characters' motivations and drives are, which will allow us to connect with them more deeply. But as it is, there's still a very big chance that it will be an equally arduous, pretentious clusterfuck to what Season 1 was. It looks like it will involve more William flashbacks and more bullshit quests for the Man in Black to go on, but even then, I won't mind too much as long as it's not fucking boring. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I really wanted to like Westworld, and I'm glad it's successful, because hopefully it will mean more 1973 science fiction films get a HBO remake. I myself am really looking forward to Attack of the Killer Tomatoes to be made into a 10-episode series starring Jeff Goldblum. But as it is, I can't say that I do like Westworld, because there's just so much shit that comes with it.
Yeah, I thought that went well though. It's a good video, good video. That beginning bit is funny. People will like it, I reckon.
Yeah, people really like Westworld though. That's the only thing I'm a bit worried about.
Yeah, but that guy over it. Do you know what I mean?
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. You've been watching an episode of NitPix. Remember to like and subscribe, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. And if you fancy it, donate to our Patreon. Here's some sexy, beautiful people who donated on our Patreon just down here. Thank you very much, and don't forget our second channel, Dick Bags. I'm just gonna go drink some bolognese. Skip-a-ba-ba bolognese. Skip-a-ba-ba-ba. Skip-a-bolognese. Spaghetti-ba-ba-ba. Skip-a-ba-ba. Spag-bo. Spaghetti-ba-ba-ba. Bolognese. Skip-a-da-ba. Skip-a-da-ba-ba. Bolognese. Spaghetti. Spaghetti. Bolognese. Bolognese. That's the good shit.